trouble promised to us in Scripture, that there's going to be pain, there's going to be suffering. Right. And I think a lot of this generation, they don't want the process. The pain and the struggle is what makes the person. Long story short, these kids molested me, and then that sets me on a trajectory of like trying to be this like tough guy and some gang stuff, and we kind of become the kids that are like breaking into houses in the neighborhoods. Like that's like our shtick. Cops come, we full on get handcuffed, arrested. I'm hanging out with these guys and they're just like, man, someday you're gonna do great things for Jesus. Like I remember that very vividly, like multiple people telling me that.
Yeah.
And I was like, Jesus,
what are you
real.
even talking about?
This whole thing isn't real. Like you guys are crazy.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Thematic Podcast. My name is Craig. My guest today is Ruslan. I'm going to introduce him in a minute. This is a series called Conversations in Contrast. We are sitting right now in Shalom, the mobile podcast studio. We're traveling from Seattle to San Diego. And Ruslan, you're actually one of the last interviews that we're doing before we get out of here, because supposedly there's a hurricane coming.
Supposedly.
We'll
see.
We don't live in fear though, do we? But we're finishing up here. We've been on the road since for about a month. And so anyway, to say, if you're listening or watching, if you hear background noise, we're in an RV park in a literal trailer. And so, but
and you guys you guys have done a cool job with this. This is awesome.
Thank you.
This is great.
That really means a lot coming from you, because man, your studio is so like top notch professional. Yeah. We've really tried. We spent about a month working on this thing. But yeah, we are in a 26-foot long trailer. But if you're new to this series, I just want to let you know what it is. We felt compelled by God to pull back the curtain on pain a little bit. And, typically in our culture, people are putting their best face forward, which isn't a bad thing. But on social media specifically, we feel like we're maybe unintentionally training a generation to look at other people's lives through filters, through the highlights. And so what's happening is people are looking at the highlights of somebody else, but they know the pain and the struggle going on within them. And so they're maybe thinking, I can never do something amazing for God because I know all my stuff. But it appears at least like everybody else's life is so good. And so we felt, put it like this, Ruslan, like one of the thoughts was like, if a 16-year-old rolled up to King David in his prime, and he's like, yeah, but look at you. Mm-hmm. You're the king. You've got the kingdom. You've got it all. Like, your life is made. Mm-hmm. And then David's like, yeah, but son, let me tell you about 15 years of running for my life. Mm-hmm. Like, you didn't know about that. Right. And so we found that there's a making of a man or woman of God, sometimes through struggle and suffering, just a process that God takes people through to prepare them to be used in his hand. Mm-hmm. And so on this series, we're interviewing all very influential and powerful people doing great things. And so the question really is like, is their life like that? Are they doing awesome things for God because everything's just been laid out and perfect for them? Or have they been through something? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to just start with that simple question to you. And let me just, if it's okay with you, the way I want to introduce you today and every guest on this series is everybody that I'm interviewing could have a huge curated bio with all of the stats and all the things, and I'm sure you could as well. I don't know all of the details of your life, but the way that I'm trying to introduce people is like the way that I would imagine somebody perceiving somebody from afar. Mm-hmm. So maybe even the way that I would view you, because like we've never met in person before today. I've known of you for about a year. So if it's okay with you, I want to introduce you that way.
Okay, go for it.
Just the way that like...
Let's see if we'll add any of this to my bio and my one sheet for my next podcast.
So this is what I see and what maybe a quote-unquote normal person might see of you. I see somebody that has absolutely blown up on social media in terms of sharing the gospel, specifically speaking towards relevant issues. You have one of the best like YouTube presence in terms of Christian content creators. You're like I mentioned earlier, your studio is just killer. But anyway, you're reaching millions of people online, and I also know that you're involved in the music industry. I think you're a rapper, and I think maybe you have a label as well that you either did or do run, and so you're working with other artists. So it's music, entrepreneurship, but at least what I see most is just like reaching masses of people through YouTube and Christian content. And so I don't know what else you have a family, but I don't know what else is involved in your life. But that alone, from afar, is like, man, this guy's like a superstar in the kingdom, like doing great things. So has your life just been easy and just totally laid out for you? God maybe gave it all to you on a silver platter, or have you been through some difficult things, some struggle, some pain, some sorrow, some suffering, maybe even, I don't know, you call it the dark night of the soul. So I don't know, how much or how little you talk about those things, but if you're willing, to the degree that you're willing or interested, would you tell us about some of the difficulty that God's brought you through in your life and how that took place?
Yeah. I think for starters, you said sometimes people have pain. I don't think it's sometimes. I think it's 98% of the time. When people are building something, there's usually a ton of pain and struggle. Dave Ramsey would say that the only difference between success and failure is understanding that life is a big pile of manure. And the only difference is either you're succumb and you're completely crushed by all the manure on you, or you're standing on top of all the manure.
Okay.
That's the only difference. And I think there's trouble promised to us in Scripture, that there's going to be pain, there's going to be suffering.
Right.
And I think a lot of this generation, and a lot of people on social media in general, they don't want the process. Like the pain and the struggle is what makes the person. So like enjoying going through whatever it is, and it's going to be relative based on what season you're in, right?
Right.
And so in my life, me and my family came as refugees to America from a country called Azerbaijan, Baku.
Really?
Part of the Soviet Union. Yeah. So
my grandparents were missionaries in, I would say Azerbaijan, but now I know that's not correct.
Azerbaijan. You got to say it right.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm kidding.
Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan.
Are you saying you moved or your parents moved and then you were born?
Me and my parents.
Okay, so you were born there.
I was born there. I'm ethnically Armenian. My father's Armenian. My mother is either Ukrainian or Russian, but she was adopted by an Armenian family.
Okay.
From Moscow to Baku. And so that's where she was raised. That's where my dad was raised. And I'm not sure how much you know of the tension for Armenians in that land, but Armenians are part of the Oriental Orthodox arm of the church, and by far the most persecuted because they're primarily in predominantly Islamic regions.
Yeah. I was going to say that country, isn't that country primarily Islamic?
Yes.
Okay.
So being ethnically Armenian, and then you're living in Azerbaijan, which is ethnically and culturally more Muslim.
Right.
Under the Soviet Union, there was a lot of just confusion with how all of that was set up.
Yeah.
And specifically a region, it was like an autonomous Armenian region in the middle of Azerbaijan that the Soviet Union set up, and then all that kind of flared up. And there's also a connection to the 1915 Turkish genocide. So in the 80s, there was the pogroms of Baku, which because of people coming over and saying that there was all this crazy stuff happening by Armenians supposedly hurting Arzis, the Arzis wanted to rally up all the Armenians and get them out of Baku. And so my family was caught up in that. And so there was a couple really, 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 really dark days that primarily all the men got out of there first. And me and my mom stayed behind because we're more fair-skinned. Most Armenians look more Arabic and darker skinned. We were more fair-skinned because my mom is Russian DNA-wise, right? And then I'm half Russian DNA-wise, so I'm fair-skinned. And so we stayed behind to kind of settle all the affairs. My dad had left, and he was already working in Moscow, so that was creating a ton of tension for their marriage. And so there was a lot of violence and a lot of really crazy stuff that was going on.
How old were you?
So this is between...
Like, do you have physical memories of this season?
Yeah. I remember living in Baku, and us under communism, we would get like a bathtub of water that we'd have to share. And I remember lining up for food rations. So you'd get your food and you'd get, this is what you were allotted, So I remember some of that. I remember leaving. And
do you remember what age you were then?
Yeah. So the tense stuff is like between the age of like 3 and 6.
Okay.
And then we left when I was 6. Like we finally transitioned out of 6. But at this point, my dad and my mom are on the rocks. My dad's working in Moscow because of all this stuff.
So he had moved. He's living in Russia?
He's living in Moscow, Russia, and then we're in Baku. So like he would travel back and forth. Okay. So their marriage is rocky. They both kind of have other people involved. And they come to America, and 6 months into coming out here, I discover these letters. So I'm 6. I discover these letters with these like lipstick kiss marks on them. And I'm like, oh, my mom is writing love letters to my dad.
Of course. What other context would you have? Yeah.
And they came to America as like, this is a fresh start. We're going to give our marriage another shot.
Was it here in Southern California where you landed?
San Diego, yeah.
You guys moved directly
So we were like
here?
the first Baku family from Baku, the refugee family that came over here.
Okay.
There are other people that probably came from other parts of the country, but we came here.
Is this like in the 80s or 90s?
This is 91.
91?
91. So my mom has these letters. I discover them. I bring them to my dad, and I'm like, oh, look, this is sweet. Like, she wrote you these letters. And then he reads the letters, and they're to her boyfriend back in Baku. And so that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Like he leaves, and a couple months later, he brings his girlfriend out. They get married and have kids. My mom leaves. My mom, she can't work. She knows she's the only one that kind of knows the language, and so she spirals into like a dark depression of like alcoholism, and then just dating really kind of trash dudes that were like abusive to her, And then my dad is attempting to be in my life, but she's also making it very difficult. And
do you have siblings?
So I'm getting there.
Okay.
So my dad, I'm an only child of my mom and my dad.
Okay.
Yeah. So my dad remarries, and they have twins. So I have a younger brother and sister, and then a couple years later we had Nastya, who's my youngest sister. So they're like 8 years younger than me. So but when I'm 8, he has new kids.
Okay.
And so the tension of like my mom making it extremely difficult for him to come around. I remember one time he came around, and my mom's boyfriend and my dad got into a fight in front of me, and it was crazy that like I'm watching these two dudes fight, and I'm like cheering,
fight,
like a fist fight.
Okay.
Yeah, like they're going at it, and my dad was winning, and my mom took off her heel and cut my dad's face, like hit my dad in the face with the heel to jump in
to defend her boyfriend, or help her.
Yeah, and that was I'm like 8 or 9 at this point, and so the cops come, and I'm like, my mom's like, don't tell them that I did this. I'm like, my mom's telling me to lie to the police. And so anyway, this created this tension between my dad and my dad not wanting to come around because of all this drama, and him having a whole nother family that he now has to care and provide for. And so then it just becomes a typical like single parent household. Dad's not in the picture.
Can I ask, are you guys Christian at this point through this process?
It's tricky. Armenians are the oldest Christian nation. We didn't have a written language until we wanted to translate the Bible thousands of years ago.
Right.
So we're culturally Christian.
Yeah.
If you were to ask my dad and my mom, they would say we're Christian.
Right.
The issue is it's the Oriental Orthodox arm of the church. So it's high tradition, high sacraments, high.
When you say Oriental, I'm just curious now. Yeah. Is that different than Eastern Orthodox?
Eastern, there's 4 main arms of the church. There's more than that, but the main arms of the church are the Catholic Church, the Universal Catholic Church. Yeah. The first split was like the Assyrians, and then the second split was the Oriental Orthodox around the year 460. And so that was the first schism, great schism. And so you got the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, another Assyrian church, the Armenian Orthodox Church, and the Coptic Church that split from the Catholic Church.
All before the 1054 Great Schism.
Yes, way before
East
that.
And the West.
Yes, exactly. So there was a schism first.
There's a few smaller schisms before the Great Schism.
Yeah, so this is a pretty big deal back then. So this schism happens around 460, and then the Great Schism you're thinking about is the Eastern Orthodox and Catholics, and then obviously the Reformation.
Yeah,
1500. So they're all these churches are like in very persecuted areas, and then you add communism on top of that.
Right.
And so then it becomes even more complicated to practice your faith, right? So they would say they were Christian. They would openly profess to be Christians, but in terms of like, we never had a Bible, we never went to church when we were kids.
Okay.
Like there was nothing like that.
So there's not like an experience of like a relationship with Jesus per se in those years of your life and your family life. No. Okay.
But when we came to America, the hub of the refugee community was the Armenian church.
Okay.
So that's when we started going to church. But my mom didn't want my dad to leave, right? Even though she kind of caused a lot of this. And my dad wanted to get remarried in the church. And so the church remarried him, but her claim is that he technically never divorced her. So in her mind, how can the church be against divorce and against all this stuff and then let him get remarried and get remarried, right? And within the church.
Right.
So she checks out. She doesn't want to go to church anymore.
I see.
My dad didn't really go to church. He just wanted to have like a cool wedding. I mean, because it's a vibe.
Totally.
Like the Oriental Orthodox vibe. And and in this process, like I was like an altar boy. And so in this, there's this altar boy, these other altar boys that are like maybe 13, 14. I'm like 7, 8 at this point. My dad's not around. Long story short, these kids molested me. And it was pretty bad in that just the exposure to the gay porn and like they are reenacting the stuff in the videos to me. So that was like a huge like boom. Like, and then my dad's like all of a sudden coming around. He's like, is this stuff true? And then they like flipped it and made it seem like I was the instigator of the entire situation. So now like the community, this like refugee community that's now, it's not just us, it's like, probably a couple dozen families are like, oh man, like this kid is bad, and this kid is gay and all this crazy stuff. So you got my dad not being in the picture, which probably caused the lack of supervision or contributed to it, right? Because now my mom's dating all these weirdo dudes that like beat her up and fight with my dad. And then you have the sexual assault that happens repeatedly. And then it coming out, and the way it came out was just really dark and just gaslighty. And then that sets me on a trajectory of like trying to be this like tough guy in my neighborhood. And there was a handful of Armenian families, and then like the rest of the neighborhood was like black and brown folks, and like maybe one family, right? So I'm just like, this is at the height of gangster rap. This is at the height of all this stuff in the 90s. So I get swept up into that. And that's how I discovered music. That's how I started making music.
Okay.
And
this is like Tupac, Dre,
oh yeah,
Snoop,
Tupac. I went and saw, when I was 8 or 9 years old, our community, like we lived in a complex, and so the apartment complex manager, her name was Cherie, and she took me, and I became really close friends with her son, Steven. She took us, and her boyfriend at the time took us to see Snoop and Dre at the San Diego Sports Arena. And this couldn't have been later than like 92, 93.
Wow.
And so I'm like 8 years old, maybe, on like some dude's shoulders, like, and there's like Dre and there's Snoop, and there's not a lot of kids there, and definitely not a lot of white kids there.
Right.
So I'm just like standing out like a sore thumb. And it was crazy. Like I'm, they're smoking, drinking, highly gang activity. So this becomes my environment. This becomes like the element that I'm drawn to.
And I'm just curious if you're willing to, is it just because this is the culture you're living in now and there's just not a lot of supervision, or because of all that stuff that happened to you with the abuse and then the kind of the accusation of you're the bad kid in all this, and you said I kind of became the bully and all that, was it like this mechanism to like prove that you're not what they're saying that you are, or just to like?
No, I don't think it was that deep. I think it was just at this point I'm just going to rebel.
Okay.
Right. It's just, this seems interesting. I don't have guidance. And a couple years into it, my mom finally gets a job working at a casino dealing cards. So she would try to get a job. She couldn't get a job. We were on welfare for a very long time. So she finally got a job. But the issue is this job now worked nights. And so now I'm alone. There's no one at home at night. So I'm 10, 11, it had to have been like 4th or 5th grade. And we end up like getting into some gang stuff, and we kind of become the kids that are like breaking into houses in the neighborhoods. Like that's like our shtick, and to kind of built this reputation. And at the same time, the lady Cherie that was like really involved in all this sus stuff and like the elements she was in, and I remember one time her son slept over my house. We didn't know what, like, you don't do sleepovers in Armenian culture. Like, what is that? That's weird. We don't do that. But my mom was like, okay, fine, but he can sleep over here. And that night he slept over. There was a drive-by on the back of our apartment complex, and there was bullet holes on the room. Like, I was gonna sleep there, but there was bullet holes on the. So they sprayed her house because she was involved with some sus stuff.
Wow.
So she ends up getting arrested because she was traveling and was trying to move drugs, and ends up going to jail for a couple years. So this is like, I'm like 8 or 9. She goes to jail. She comes out and is like radically on fire for Jesus. Like crazy. And at this point, I'm like, there's no God. You guys are crazy. If there is a God, he definitely doesn't love me. I want nothing to do with this Jesus. This is at like 11.
You remember having those thoughts?
Yeah, 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
And she just shared the gospel with me and everyone in the complex, and pretty much everyone gets saved in our apartment complex. It's like an 8-unit apartment complex. There's 2 Armenian families and the rest is black families. And so everybody gets saved.
Really?
Yeah, it's the craziest thing. So the guys who live directly next door to me, they're kind of, one of them was a truck driver named Willie. I remember Willie drove me up to Oceanside. I'd never been out of San Diego. And like not just like I'd never been out of my neighborhood. Like going downtown was far, right?
Yeah.
So he drove me up to Oceanside. We went to the beach, and he was a truck driver. And so all these guys are getting saved, and they're like seeing that I'm misguided, and they start trying to kind of be a surrogate dad to me and be there for me, right? And Willie would be there, and they were just sharing everyone just kept sharing the gospel with me. And I remember they would just be super encouraging and accepting. And at this point, but they know that I'm like I'm smoking weed. I lose my virginity at like age 10 to a girl who lives in the apartment complex. I'm a rough kid. Like, I'm a bad kid, right? My mom doesn't know any of this until our gang member, who was this like 25-year-old dude that lived in the complex, gang leader, ends up getting arrested. And in an attempt to bail him out, his girlfriend tells us the new guy she's messing with has money in his house and checks in his house, and we should break in and steal the money so we can get our gang leader out of jail, post his bail. And in our attempt to do this, an ex-police officer lives at the condos and basically like sees us. So I'm hanging in this like bathroom window, and my buddy, who's supposed to be the lookout guy, gets put into this like UFC armbar and is like screaming, and the guy's just like, get on the ground. And so the cops come, we full on get handcuffed, arrested, taken to this like holding station. They call my mom, they call their mom, and that was like when my mom found out like how far gone it really was. Yeah. And so it was pretty crazy. So all of that then culminates to me breaking into a couple other houses, but I have to do probation now. So I could either do probation at my school. I got to find somewhere to do probation. Community service. For my probation, I got to do community service. Mm-hmm. So I ended up doing it at their church, at this like Black Baptist church. Okay. And I'm like just there. I'm cleaning the church. I'm hanging out with these guys, and they're just like, man, someday you're going to do great things for Jesus. And I was like, is
this after the people were preaching the gospel to you?
This is like years.
Before you're like surrendered.
This is nowhere near me being surrendered. Okay. This is years ahead. People were planting seeds. Yeah. And then it's like not just planting seeds, but like very specific prophetic stuff. Like God is going to use you in a mighty way to reach the next generation. And you're going to do great things for Jesus. Like, I remember that very vividly. Like, multiple people telling me that. Yeah. And I was like, Jesus, what are you even talking about? This whole thing isn't real. Like, you guys are crazy, you know? Yeah. And what happened is my mom got a job at Ocean's 11 Casino, which is not too far from where we are now. And all of this, my 7th grade year, I'm like barely get off of probation. I got really, I got like really bad grades, like 1.0 GPA, just terrible kid. Barely got the community service hours done. And they like, my lawyer was like, oh, it's because he got the stomach virus and that's why his grades are so bad, you know? So they let me off probation. But I break into another house, and then this time they know like we're the kids that do it. They can't prove it, but they know. So they're sending people to to my apartment complex. Like they're sending people with bats to like, they want to get us. Right. And so it's like, there's that. And then there's this kid at my school, Samoan kid that I was like friends with. And he one day brought a gun to school, and he was like, hey, I got a gun. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, you're full of it. We weren't playing with guns back then.
Right.
Like, that was probably the saving grace. Like, we didn't have firearms. I maybe saw a gun once or twice. He brings a gun to school. I was like, you're stupid. That's not a gun. Then the next day he's gone. Like, we don't see him. I get called into the principal's office. They bring me in and they're like, hey, this kid said that you gave him the gun. And I'm like, I didn't even see a gun. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, you were on probation. You have this reputation, And I'm like in the principal's office talking to two grown detectives, and they're telling me that like, yeah, man, like you sound like the guy for this gun. This is what he's saying. And I'm like, no. And I remember being a kid, like standing up and yelling and cussing out the officers, the detectives, like, this is not my gun. Run the effing fingerprints. You will not find my fingerprints on the gun. And he's like, we're going to run the fingerprints. We're going to make sure that you're going to, all this crazy stuff. So long story short, I'm dealing with that. There's these other dudes trying to beat me up for breaking into this other house. And then the next day after that, this dude shows up to school with while I'm leaving, school's done. He meets me on El Cajon Avenue, and he has a knife. And he's like, why did you snitch on me? And I'm like, what? Like, what are you even talking about? And so he literally hurls at me with this knife. And thankfully, he was a fat Samoan kid, and I was fairly athletic. And so I just made a beeline and ran down El Cajon Avenue. and I'm not exaggerating, like right within this window, like that same week, we moved to North County. And we moved out of that neighborhood. Okay. And I got a fresh start. And I was like, it was like everything was building up and culminating to like, something was going to happen.
Yeah, if you had stayed there,
I was either going to get beat up real bad or worse. Like, but something was going to happen. And so we moved to North County. I'm like, all right, I'm done trying to be a tough guy. This is a new start for me. Okay. I'm just going to be the basketball guy. Like, I'm going to be the professional basketball player. I'm going to go to the NBA. They told me I could do anything if I put my mind to it. Gonna be professional basketball player.
Yeah, what are you, like 6 foot?
No, I'm 5'10" and a half.
There you go. Bugsy Bogues did it. I'm gonna do it.
But I'm pretty tall for my age at that time.
Yeah, okay.
And no one sits you down and like has the real conversation. Yeah. Like, hey man, like.
But at least it was something positive to redirect you.
It was something positive, but it definitely caused a degree of delusion. And then I remember my mom's new boyfriend, sat me down and was like, hey, like, there's this thing called like genetics, right? And I was like, what are you talking about? No, like I could do anything. He's like, well, our Armenian people, like, we're not really built for the vigors of basketball. Like, we do better at like sports like chess and table tennis,
Okay. You're
so
like, forget you, dude. I'm going.
But I'm like, dude, I'm all in. Like, there was a high school right next to me called it was like a continuation school, and literally right across the street is a basketball hoop, and I'm out there all the time, every day, shooting. I started lifting weights at the time. Like, this is going into 8th grade. I don't know how I was even able to go to middle school here because my grades were so bad, but somehow I got into 8th grade, and I just got super serious about basketball. And I remember finishing 8th grade. My GPA was a 1.0. My GPA 8th grade, the end of 8th grade, was a 3.8. That's how drastic of a turnaround. Just a different
and no more crime. Like, you walked
no more
away
crime.
New fresh start. So you walk away.
Completely done.
Still no faith in Jesus though.
No faith in Jesus. I
need to change my.
I mean, I'm 8th grade. What is 8th grade? 13, 14.
Yeah.
I had smoked weed. I had drunk. I had sold drugs. I had lost my virginity. I gotten into a ton of fist fights. I've done everything there is to. I'm done. Like, what else is there to do?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, I'm gonna be a good kid.
You're seeing the dead. You had been through enough to see the dead end of those things, breaking into houses and all that. Okay, this ain't gonna work.
So when kids are like 9th grade, or like starting to experiment with weed, and like, I'm like, well, you guys are losers. Like, this is stupid. What are we doing?
Okay.
Like, this is lame, And so I start high school. Start dating a girl freshman year. I'm still playing basketball. I'm starting to pursue music because I was on a basketball team and I would just freestyle, and they were like, dude, you're good. Like, you're good to just kind of, we're walking around freestyling. You're like really good. You should do this more seriously. A friend of a friend had a computer. We went over there. I did some demos. And then I did like a talent contest.
Threw it up on Napster.
I did that. I did throw some stuff on Napster.
Okay, there you go.
MP3.com was the thing. That was like the SoundCloud before
fun
SoundCloud.
Talking about people living in the 90s.
Yeah, man.
Late 90s. Kids know nothing about that.
So I ended up winning this like talent show at Bringle Terrace Park, which is right where I live now, right by Bringle Terrace Park. And I meet a girl at the show because I was like, all of a sudden I had like clout. And so I started talking to this girl, and she, her family went to church. And so she was like, hey, like, you know, if you want to hang out on the weekends, we can, but only if you go with me and my family to church.
Okay.
And I'm like, at this point, I've made some good decisions. I made some choices that were better, but I'm still like an atheist. Yet I'm listening to Tupac and DMX. Mm-hmm. And Tupac kind of generally talked about God, but DMX would have these prayers at the end of his albums.
Right.
The albums would be awful. It'd be
terrible content.
Terrible content. He's talking about just the most grotesque things.
Yeah.
And at the end, there's a prayer and like a song to Jesus. So I'm like, well, if DMX can go to church, like, all right, like I'll go check this thing out with you. So I go, and we had a break on and off type of relationship. But I'm still going to church. So I get my car my sophomore year, and I start dating this other girl that's a Jehovah's Witness. So I'm like back and forth between these two girls, and I'm exploring the faith. I'm talking to the Jehovah's Witness girl about her reasonings for the scripture and the Watchtower, and like understanding their view of Jesus being a God but not God Almighty. And then I'm talking to this other girl on and off, still going to church. And I was basically in a spot where I was like, Jesus is the Son of God. He's not God. But my music isn't clean. Like, my music's pretty vulgar at this point. And this was a 2-year process of like wrestling with this stuff. And again, God in his providence, I'm working at Pizza Hut. And working at Pizza Hut.
You still a teenager?
So I lied on my application when I was 15, and I said I was 16 so I can get a job at Pizza Hut.
Okay.
I changed my birthday. And so at 15 and a half, I started working at Pizza Hut. And I worked that job for a couple of years. And while I'm working that job, my manager and our like head delivery driver were like devout Christians.
Okay.
And I'm externally processing this with them. And they're like, yeah, no, Jesus is God Almighty. Like, Jesus is not the Son of God. Like, your Jehovah's Witness girlfriend's wrong. Your Muslim friends are wrong. Jesus is definitely God Almighty. So I'm like, all right, well, how do you know? And they're like, you just like read the Gospel of John. And I'm like, oh, I'm like dabbling, but not like, I wasn't a great reader because English is my second language. So like, I really didn't know how to read until I started reading the Bible, really. So they gave me this book called The New Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It's a book about this thick by Dr. Josh McDowell.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I start reading that. And again, through a 2-year process of wrestling, I finally land at like, oh, Jesus is who he says he is. He is God Almighty. All right. And then I started trying to convince this Jehovah's Witness girl that she was in a cult, which ended that relationship. And I go back to the other Christian girl, but now she's a mess and she has all kinds of issues. And so me and her finally break up. And then I start, when we finally broke up, it was the end of my junior year. I finally like surrendered my entire life to the Lord, like everything. And I remember going to Miles Ahead Crusade, 4th of July.
What was the crusade?
The Miles, you know who Miles McPherson is?
I just interviewed him yesterday.
Yeah, so you know Miles.
Yeah.
Okay. So Miles,
he did a crusade.
He used to do these crusades.
Yeah.
And so this is going into my senior year. This is 2002.
Wow.
Miles Ahead Crusade.
Yeah, we were just with him yesterday.
Cross Movement is performing.
Okay.
I don't remember if Switchfoot was there or POD. There was definitely a rock band.
Let's go.
There.
Southtown.
And so I make a public declaration of faith,
okay,
like at that altar call. I've told Miles this story before, but he's always super pumped because we're friendly now. And I meet the guys from Cross Movement, and then a week later I meet guys here that were like Christian rapper guys who were older than me, who then took me in and just full on just discipled me. Like, they were really interesting guys in that they came out of the local church, but they weren't the most like committed to a local church because they were like these rapper guys and they didn't really fit. but this group called Future Shock, and so they just poured into me, man, and it was great.
And real quick, can I ask a question? Because it's just interesting. It sounds to me like even at this age, you're really making an intellectual, like you've thought this thing through.
Oh yeah, I come through the door of apologetics for sure.
Okay, yeah. So like it wasn't just like a teenage, like you know, like emotionalist or whatever reason. Like you've really like thought this through at that age, and okay. And so you came to faith by like evidence and like, I believe in this Jesus.
It just made the most sense to how the universe existed, to what our concepts of morality are. Like it just clicked.
Okay, so that happens, you make a public declaration, but then the process of like looking at your actual life and discipleship starts to take place through these guys. Okay.
And these guys were interesting because again, they were jaded by the institution of church. They had been hurt by it. So not only do I deal with all the heavy apologetic stuff, but then I'm dealing with the heavy, what we call deconstruction stuff out of the rip. We're talking about all the hard questions. We're wrestling through these issues. We're talking about the local church and all of these different, is it a business? Is it this? Like all the hard stuff.
Right.
I got to work out with guys that were basically a little younger than I am now, and I'm 18 doing life with them. Like when I graduated from high school.
So this is like right around the 2000s then.
Yeah. This is like 2003.
Yeah,
so when I graduated high school, these are the only guys that showed up to my graduation and took me out to dinner.
Okay.
Like these were like my guys. Like my dad wasn't there. I don't think my mom came, or maybe she came and bounced. But these were the dudes that like took me out and like they fathered me, bro. It was crazy.
There was an interesting version of what we call deconstruction now happening in those years that a lot of people don't know about, like the emerging church.
Oh yeah, all that.
All of that was interesting. Like what? Yeah.
And so I'm finally starting to kind of get settled in, but we weren't talking about mental health. We weren't talking about anything. So I'm like going to church and dealing with these things, and we start a ministry right after this moment. Like we start a ministry, they're kind of helping me, and I'm just like trying to reach all my friends at school, and we would do like a Bible study / open mic. And I would just, because I worked at Pizza Hut, I'd get free pizza or they would give me discounted pizza. And so we just used like one of the youth rooms at this church, and they let us use it, and it would be like sometimes 40 kids that show up, sometimes 100 kids that show up.
Wow.
Open mic, it would be like Bible study, open mic, or like food, Bible study, open mic. And I did not feel qualified to lead these Bible studies, but sometimes these guys couldn't be there. So I'm just like brand new saved, 17 years old, going for it, dude.
Thrown into it. Yeah.
And I had this 87 Toyota Celica hatchback, and we would cram 6-7 kids in there from my high school and take them to church.
Yeah.
6 months into that, the senior pastor finds out we're doing this ministry. And this is not a cookie cutter clean ministry. These are rough kids. These are kids that sometimes, a lot of them are showing up smelling like weed. Sometimes there might be a rap battle in a parking lot where there's profanity and potentially almost a fight. And the senior pastor hears about this whole thing, and basically without any notice, like shuts this thing down and is like, nope, like this is not a part of our vision. These are not the people we want to reach. And doesn't even let us have our final gathering to like tell everybody.
Wow.
And thankfully, one of my mentors was already praying that we would transition to another church that we connected with. So we had this nice seamless transition, and we continued the ministry. We've done a ton of concerts and all that. It was great. It was like an open mic type thing, and bridging the world between like art and church and media and music and all these different elements. Okay. And it was super cool. And so I'm releasing music a bit more professionally. I put out my first album in 2004, and the week of my album coming out, really interesting thing. My buddy was one of my close friends. He was on 3 songs on the album. He catches pneumonia. He's a heavyset guy. And so he catches pneumonia, and we are like praying for him, but we're also having this like, hey man, you got to get in shape, bro. Like, you're 400 pounds. Like this is not cool.
Yeah.
He's like, I know, and like and I remember like him, like us having Bible study and him like kind of hunching over and leaning over and just struggling. And so like the next day he's like in the ICU.
Wow.
And we're going to visit him, and he's just going through it. Like he's not well. This is the month of May, and we would show up every day. We'd pray for him. We'd read him the Bible. He would be awake, but he had the tubes, so he couldn't talk to us. And so we're like believing for healing. He's 20. I'm 19 at this point, and dude, like the week of my album release coming out, we're throwing this big concert at the church. Like, he dies at 20 years old. And so now,
from pneumonia. Like,
now it's like, whoa, God, why didn't you heal him?
Yeah.
So now I have to deal with all that, right? And I remember speaking at the memorial service, and so like I had to deal with the heavy stuff first. I had to deal with the apologetics. I had to deal with the church hurt. I had to deal with the why would God take my best friend from me? You know, this makes no sense. All that stuff like got sorted out, but I dealt with it intellectually. I didn't really deal with it from a practical standpoint. And so I'm here doing the cool ministry stuff and music's starting to take off, but like I'm still looking at porn. Like I don't really know how to process feelings and emotions well. Like I could shut down, push people away, or I can get so harsh that like people don't want to be around me. And so I kind of just wandered in the practical aspects of the faith. Like there's practical, tangible things that when you read Proverbs or you read Ecclesiastes or you read the parable of the talents that are like, oh no, this should look different. And that was a struggle. And so it all culminated where 2008, me and my girlfriend, who is now my wife at the time, we dated for 4 years. And so we're getting married 2008. I have a job at the YMCA working at their studio. I'm getting like, I don't know, 35 hours a week doing like engineer work, right? So it's like music related. I'm still going to school. My wife is finishing school. She has a part-time job. And then like the economy just completely tanks.
Right.
So my hours at the YMCA get cut from 35 to 15. My wife can't find a full-time job after she graduates in 2008. I still have some school left to do. No one's really booking us because we don't make like cookie cutter Christian rap music. And so the kind of rock bottom moment in a way was I had a couple of years prior, I had co-signed on a condo with my mom. We bought this like condo in San Marcos. This is at the peak of the housing bubble. And me and my wife couldn't afford to get our own place. And so the first year, or like 9 months of our marriage, we're like living with my mom in this condo, which was like completely humiliating and embarrassing. My mom's an alcoholic. She smokes in the house. My wife, who's like doesn't really get along with my mom, you know.
Wow.
And well, my mom doesn't really get along with my wife. They're much friendlier now and in a great spot. But it's like, dude, you know, like this is a mess. You know, this is a mess. Like, and I didn't have the tangible, like practical skills of like knowing how to go in the marketplace and earn more money so that I don't have to go through that. And in that rock bottom, like we end up applying for affordable housing, thinking that like, oh, well, maybe we get affordable housing. And it like, those are all like waiting lists. So finally we make it up the waiting list, like 6 months, 9 months in for a 2-bedroom in San Marcos. It would have been like $400 or something like that. And right when we make it up, my mom's adjustable mortgage rate goes up. So her mortgage basically doubles.
Oh, wow.
I'm a co-signer on that mortgage. So the place is now in foreclosure. So when we finally get approved for a place, I have a foreclosure on my record.
Oh no.
Or I have like, it was in an official foreclosure. It was like 10 months of like no payments basically.
So the loan you had was like literally the quintessential problem of that bubble.
Absolutely.
In 07, 08.
And I remember she told me like her mortgage went from like $2,300 a month to like $4,500 a month.
Insane.
Like virtually overnight. And there was no relief. She tried to refinance it, but there was nothing. So we are living with my mom, and then so finally a year into it, we just scrape up every dollar we have, and we just get like a regular 2-bedroom apartment. I think it was like $1,100, $1,200. We just finally move out.
With all of you, or
just me and my mom? Excuse me, just me and my wife. My
Okay.
mom stays in the condo for like another year and just doesn't pay anything.
Oh yeah.
And
Until they finally boot her.
Until they finally gave her like a cash for keys type of thing. And so all this is wrecking my credit. All of this is like completely destroying everything. And now me and my wife are like, okay, we got to start doing things different. We got to start thinking about financial literacy. And so we discover like the Dave Ramsey baby steps and all this stuff. And we're listening to Dave Ramsey. We're getting out of debt. We had about $40,000 in debt, college student loans, brand new car payments because we needed a reliable, stable car, all the stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And halfway through this process, I'm getting these letters about a judgment against the HOA fees that my mom didn't pay, but they're sending them to me. They're not sending them to my mom. And I'm like, I haven't lived here in a year and a half, 2 years. Like, what do you guys, And my name was misspelled. I'm like, you guys, this isn't even me. My name is misspelled. Well, halfway through this Dave Ramsey process, we had just paid rent, and we check our accounts. All the money's out of our accounts. So they got a judgment against me because my mom didn't pay $1,200 in HOAs. That judgment went to $5,000. They cleared out our accounts. I think we had maybe $3,000 in our account with our emergency fund. Thankfully, we had just paid rent. And so now our accounts is levied. We can't put any money into it. So my wife has to start a separate account just in her name, and I'm signing over my checks to her so that we can at least have a separate and just
so they're not
pay the bills. They're not taking it.
Wow.
So I find out there's this $5,000 judgment. I can't do anything about it. I can't settle it. Then I pull my credit. I find out that there's the foreclosure, which was eventually going to fall off, right? But in that, I find out that there's a second mortgage that doesn't fall in line with the foreclosure. That when you have a foreclosure, they only foreclose on your main mortgage. If you have a second mortgage, and they were doing these weird deals where you could have multiple mortgages, which is like crazy to think about. So the second mortgage was $60,000.
What?
And it was on my credit. So I'm like, we have over $100,000 in debt.
Oh my.
Like this, I'm gonna have to file for bankruptcy. Like this is it, And
how old were you at this point?
So this is maybe 2 years into being married to 25, 26.
Any kids yet?
No kids.
Okay.
So I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like I'm gonna have to file for bankruptcy. And so what we ended up doing was, so I listened to Dave Ramsey's show, and then I remember an episode he was like, just, if the debt's old, and it was at that point. So this is maybe like she stopped paying the mortgage in like 2007. At this point, this is 2010, 2011. So this is going to fall off anyway, right? A couple years in. So I called them and I'm like, hey, like I want to settle this with you guys. I want to be honest and settle it. Like I'm responsible for it. I pay off the $5,000 thing, settling with them. So we end up, by the grace of God, we settled. I don't know how this is a miracle. We settled on that $60,000 for $1,000.
What?
Yeah. So that second mortgage falls off my credit. We settled with them. We sent them $1,000. We got it in writing, sent them $1,000, and then that was settled. And then we ended up paying the rest of the $45,000 in debt. Paid the rest of that off in like 18 months. So we're completely debt free.
Wow.
So in this journey to be debt free, now we learn about budgeting and savings and emergency funds and all of these different things. So right when I got debt free, it was the end of 2012, and I ended up getting a job at my church because I wanted to be debt free before I went into ministry. So I got a job at my church. My wife was working full time. I get a job at my church. We end up doing some traveling, and then like right after that, 2014, my son is born, and and then that's kind of a year after that is my wife tells me like, hey, I think you need to quit your job and pursue music, and go do this music thing full time. She was a stay-at-home mom at the time, so at this point we're like, okay, well we want you to come stay home. We don't want to pay for daycare. Like we could figure it out. So I'm working at the church and I'm doing music, and it just got too much. And so she ends up telling me like, yeah, you should put in your 2-week notice. Like, come and try this music thing. So June 1st, 2015, I quit my job. First day as a full-time entrepreneur was that day. And I did music for 5 years running a boutique label. That was a lot and very messy, but I was an independent Christian artist, Christian rapper, providing for my family. Like my wife didn't have to work for those years. I mean, she maybe nanny here or there. And so that was 5 years of like finally figuring this stuff out, and 5 years of that. And that was messy, and I'm still not dealing with my mental health and all that kind of stuff. And then finally, like I started getting more serious about therapy because I kept seeing this like relational blowout. So I go to therapy. And then 2020, the pandemic happens, and I pivot over to YouTube. I was already dabbling, and my YouTube grows from like 15,000 subscribers at the beginning of 2020 to like 60,000 by the end of 2020. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, this instantly replaced my music income. And I had a guy that's been working with me since 2017. His name is Zach. He's our COO now. And Zach has just been with me since he was 17. And so the moment I could afford to pay him, like I brought him on full time.
Wow.
And we got a Chris. And so, yeah, the YouTube stuff has been really good.
So
I know that was a long story.
Yeah. But and it's just not the stuff that people normally hear, so that's really good. I wonder if before we move on, if you could just briefly, you seem like a pretty strong, confident guy, and like you talked about a lot of areas of struggle throughout there, but you did consistently talk a little bit about what you call mental health. Like, so were there pains of or parts, whether it's to do with the finances or the losses or the brokenness, whatever, were there parts of just like like you're just broken?
Yeah. So
like things like, did you cry? Did you break? Like, are you like giving up? Like what was it like for you?
Yeah, I would say that the rock bottom points was that living with my mom, that first year of marriage was really hard. And it's really embarrassing even telling that story. And then the second point was when I confessed to my wife that I was still struggling with porn.
Yeah.
My therapist now, he broke it down so eloquently. He said, you have two buckets. One bucket is your ability to manage stress and not put more on your plate than you can handle, and knowing how to regulate your mood, and knowing how to get enough sleep and do all do all those things so you're not stressed out, right? So there's that bucket. And then the other bucket is like, you got to have an outlet and have fun. Recreation, right? Recreation is recreation. You got to have outlets. And I, at that time, in the middle of all this, I didn't have either. Like, I didn't know how to manage stress.
Right.
I had just started working out, which is now an amazing stress management tool. My sleeping was terrible because I'm working a full-time job. Then I'm coming home and I'm working on music for hours. Right. Staying up late. And so those buckets were all sorts of whack. I didn't really have any hobbies. I didn't really do anything for fun. Right. I had injured my knee playing pickup basketball, so I couldn't play basketball for fun. So I didn't have either. Like, I didn't know any of these things. And so the rock bottom was like telling my wife, like, hey, like, this is still a struggle for me. And she thought it wasn't, And I'm like, yeah, nah, this is real. And I could tell you why, and I could explain it to you, but like, you need to know. And so, her crying and just seeing her broken over that was really hard. And then she was really gracious and was very merciful, and we were able to work through all of that. And now it's like trying to help that messy journey of 15 years, and how do I compress time for people? Like, how can I take all of that I learned and like condense it to a year, 2 years, right? And so it is holistic. It is part stress management, it is part outlets, it is part financial literacy, so that you're not living hand to mouth. It is part, are you accountable? Are you in a local church, right? So I think it's all connected.
What about, can I just ask about the therapy part? How valuable do you think that is?
So initially, I went through this thing called Men's Skills at my church, and it was actually from a church here called North Coast Calvary. They have a really good like Christian counseling department, and they put together this class that was like part psychology, part Bible, part group therapy. And it wasn't with a therapist, it was just like with a guy who facilitated it.
Okay.
And it was really, really good. And that got me on the journey. Like, that got me started. And then I understand like the triggers. These are what the triggers are. This is how my brain will get hijacked, whether it's seeking for dopamine or whether it's lashing out. I started understanding like why I was the way I was, and then how to set parameters and boundaries to be more careful. And then like that then directly led me to like, okay, I got to make a health transformation. So I got to like go to bed when my wife goes to bed, so I could get up early and go to the gym, so I can like get the dopamine I need to last me through the strength training. And now I have something on work. So it's like 2016 and then 2018 is that happened. And a little after that, maybe 2020 is when I connected with my therapist now, who's amazing, Dr. Rudy. I went through like.
Do you think that's a valuable thing for people then?
I think if you have like trauma, like serious trauma, and I don't mean like you get sad, right? Like, because everybody can get sad. Something bad happens, you should feel sad if you're human, right? But I think if you are dealing with like, there's sexual assault, there's like you. I ended up finding out through my insurance. I went to a therapist through my insurance who wasn't good. But I ended up finding out I had onset PTSD from all the stuff in my childhood, which would then cause all the relational issues. And, and so like, I think having words to articulate that and not letting it necessarily define me, but just knowing that like, it's like your mind is like a car, like it needs fuel. it needs the oil changed.
Right,
It needs
right.
the tires changed. And your mind is like that. And so I would say if people have legitimate trauma, and I mean like not someone hurt your feelings and made you sad, like actual trauma, I think therapy with a Christian therapist would serve a lot of people well.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing all that. I know that's, just telling your story sometimes, and the brokenness of it isn't always easy.
Yeah.
But we appreciate that. And the second part of this idea of conversations in contrast is, and this isn't going to be as long, of course, but I want to talk to people about their pain and their struggle, and then I just want to end on something awesome. And so I don't know how much you know about this, but I was contacting a few people sort of behind your back or whatever, just saying, hey, what's something awesome? I just like to end on something awesome. What's something awesome about Ruslan and one of your good buddies? He said something, and so I thought, that's really unique. And so I don't know how much you feel comfortable talking about this or not, but he told me about it. He said that now you also live with some family members, and you're taking care of more than just your family.
Yeah,
you're providing space.
Came full circle.
And so, man, that's really cool. So, like, what can you tell us about that? What does that look like, and what are you doing?
I don't talk about it publicly, but like I take care of my mom, so all of her bills I cover now.
Wow.
And then we have my mother-in-law lives with us. My sister-in-law, who recently got out of prison, lives with us. She got out of prison in December.
Wow.
2 nieces. Yeah, and then obviously my family. So that's an adventure and a half.
Yeah.
But it flows out of this passage. I believe it's in 1 Timothy. It's a really harsh passage unless you actually understand the context. It says, he who does not provide for the needs of his family, specifically his immediate family, is worse than a non-believer and has denied the faith. Right? Now that sounds really harsh, and it is. but the context of it is there's these widows in the church, and they want the church benevolence fund, if you will. And some of these widows are young and attractive and kind of gossipy, right? And Paul is like, the young widows who can remarry, like let them remarry so that they're not just a burden on the church. The widows who have families, the family should take care of them. The widows who don't have families and no one's there for them, and they're older, the church should take care of them.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think about it, it is actually the in a way, if we all did this, the magic bullet to a lot of our like social ills. Like
Right.
We don't need the government to do it.
Yeah.
We don't need we don't need another check. Like no. We can take care of our family and then our immediate family, right? Wow. And so we have this weird like, we send old folks off to homes, and just kind of check out. And so in the scriptures, there's this beautiful like almost welfare like system
within the family.
Within the family. And it's not very Western. I think Western. And listen, some people, they need boundaries and they need to be very careful with living with in-laws because they're toxic. My mom doesn't drink anymore. She doesn't live with us, but my mom doesn't drink anymore. And so she's in a much better place. But yeah, being able to just like tell her like, hey, like, don't worry about it. Like you have a debit card and there's always money in this account. And like, you can go to Dee Dee's. My mom is super frugal and cheap too. So it's not like a lot of money, but like her rent's covered, her food is covered. Go spend a little money here and there, go to Dee Dee's fashion, and then, so it's living out that verse. Like it's really living out that passage and saying like, if I have the means, I am responsible as the head, as the provider. Why would I want this state to take care of my family?
Wow.
Right. Well, I can take care of them. They're fine.
That's awesome, man.
And it springboards them into doing cool stuff. Like my niece just got a certification and she's working at a skilled nursing facility. So she has like a career now, which is cool. She came out of the foster care system. Like I said, my sister-in-law came out of prison in December. She's had a really rough testimony. And so she's doing good. She just applied for promotion at her job. And so, it's cool. It's challenging, right? Because if you're not on top of that stress management bucket, it can get tense.
Yeah.
So I'm, by the grace of God, have gotten better at the stress management side. And I think now my therapist is like, you need to go do fun stuff. Like, you need to go do something fun. Like, and I'm like, all right, fun. Okay, what do I want to do for fun? I don't have any hobbies like that, you know. I like to go to the range and shoot. But yeah. So it's cool.
That's really cool, though, man. That is really cool. That's something. I mean, I know some, a lot of people help with their family and different things to certain degrees, but man, it just sounds like you're going above and beyond. And I love that you just have like a legitimate biblical basis for like, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And God's provided for you, and that's really cool.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing all that with us. Where can people find you if they aren't yet already following you? Or
just Ruslan KD on all platforms. Usually, if you search Ruslan on YouTube, I'm the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
You're big now.
I don't know about that.
You have any music coming out? Or are you still doing the music?
I don't know
stuff?
when this drops, but there's a song called My God that I'm super excited about, and then we have a couple of things in a pipeline. I've been very fortunate to have a team that can help me, like across the YouTube stuff, and then also in the music stuff, and just having an engineer. I used to do everything myself.
Yeah.
Like I used to be a DIYer, like everything from the beats to the mixing to the album cover. Now we have the resources and the team to really spread that work out. And so the music stuff is like, honestly, that's kind of the fun now. Like there's less pressure.
You do that for fun.
Yeah, like I do it and I put it out and people love it, but I don't need to make a profit off of the music.
I see.
It's just fun.
So Ruslan, Ruslan, and does it always have KD? Can I ask what that stands for?
King's Dream, that's the name of our parent company.
Oh, okay.
Live your life, like live your life the King's way, right?
Okay.
God's way is for you to live your life His way.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I wonder if, just in closing, would you be willing to say a prayer?
Yeah.
Just for anybody that's, man, there's so many areas that you've been through in your life, from your childhood, refugee, abuse. There's a million areas. So however you want to pray, I know people are going to resonate with many parts of your story, and we'll just close that way.
Cool. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this podcast and this conversation, and we thank you for all the people listening. And we pray for the people wherever they're at and whatever struggle they're going through and whatever the circumstances are, that maybe this conversation will remind them what we kind of opened with, which is that the only difference between success and failure is if you're standing on top of all the manure or if you're getting crushed by all the manure. And so the people that are being crushed by life and all the struggle and the suffering and the issues, I pray that you would give them a glimmer of hope and give them a tangible step that they can take to move in the right direction. And all the pain, all the suffering, Lord, all the anger, that it would be used as fuel.
Yeah.
It'd be used as fuel. And that they would be okay with using it as fuel, that they'd be okay with channeling that darkness into light. So we thank you that you are the light. We thank you that you are who you say you are. And we thank you for this conversation. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Ruslan.
Yeah,
Appreciate
man.
it. God bless you, everybody.